I want to spend the rest of our time on the other dimension, not so much making it easier for people to come to us, where they can explore their spirituality, learn about Christian faith, and hopefully move towards baptism and incorporation in the community. But this other model, which I'm calling the Go model. How do you do that? Well, a lot of our help in this respect has come from the Church of England, which I think it is fair to say is experiencing a renewal. At the last count, they discovered there are about 60,000 people in different denominations across the country who were involved in fresh expressions of church who were not involved in a church a few years ago. 60,000. If I heard of 100, I'd be excited. If I heard of 500, I'd be ecstatic. 60,000. But it's not easy. It has been very hard work. It's been worked on for many years. But they now say, as they look at how these new things have come into being, there is definitely a sequence of events that takes place. And again, as I was listening to Ted this morning, I thought some of those were true in his experience as well. Number one, listening and following God's call. Where is God at work? What is God asking us to do? That's why I wanted to call him when he said we didn't do research. But he was noticing, here are some people we haven't seen before. They look a little different from us, so who are they? And that was the first step towards that church getting involved in this whole amazing ministry. So listening and following God's call. Often that is followed not by starting a worship service for those people. That can be premature. Simply serving needs. And again, that's what the church that Ted leads was involved in. Here are some people who need a place to be. Let's show them a TV game or whatever it may be. Out of that comes a community. And again, you heard the story of how that happened. And then again, out of that community, as you grow in community, you grow closer to one another, it's easier to share your stories, whether they're stories of faith or stories of loss of faith or stories of never had faith. So often what comes about then is evangelism and disciple making. Now again, the people that Ted was working with were by and large already Christians, but we trust that they continued to grow in their following of Jesus through the ministry that was provided there. But if you're working with unchurched people, people with no church connection, often evangelism will be part of that. Them inquiring about Christian faith maybe for the first time. And then at the end of that process comes worship, not earlier than that. One of the clearest examples that I've ever seen of this is a church in England. Now, this is in the city of Liverpool, so if you want to tell me this has nothing to do with rural ministry, I would understand that. Nevertheless, you listen for how this pastor works out those 5 principles that I've been outlining: listening, serving, building community, evangelizing, and finally, worship. I show you that not because anybody here should go and make bread. I think you understand that. It's the principle that she spent a year listening for God. Then moved on to the second stage, which was meeting people's needs, the bread, community forms. Didn't you love that line? This isn't a church, this is a house of God. How could you think otherwise? Out of that, then people have, as they share their stories, people have the opportunity, if they wish, to start attending the Bible study. And out of that, over time, comes a place of worship. I love the fact that she says this is true to the Methodist tradition, to get out from the 4 walls of the building. My guess is that several of you have congregations that are involved in fall fairs, that kind of thing. We have a similar thing in Hamilton on the street where our church is. It's called Lock Street. And one year I suggested that maybe as well as selling jams and jellies, although they're very good jams and jellies, maybe we should do something spiritual. So we put up a flip chart and invited people as they walked up and down Lock Street to write their frequently asked questions for God. And what we promised was that we would then do a sermon series in the fall based on people's actual questions. You could easily do that. And there's then this intrigue about, wow, they're going to preach about my question? Well, I should confess this wasn't terribly successful because we neglected the small detail of actually advertising the sermon series, but we won't talk about that. These things don't always work out. But the following May, I started a discussion group in our local coffee shop called The Bad Dog. And we advertised it this way. It was called The God Questions. At a recent Lock Street festival, passers-by were invited to write on a flip chart their questions to God. Some of those questions were, why are you such a jerk? Have you ever preached on that subject? There are people outside the church, that's their view of God. We don't like to think that way. God doesn't seem to have struck them dead, so God seems to be able to tolerate the question. I saw that as a way into talking about the problem of suffering. Second question, do you ever get mad? Do you ever cry? Isn't that a nice question? Who knew that people outside the church want to know that? I took that as a way into talking about incarnation. What is the point of life? Really? Like, I do want to know. It's a good way to talk about the gospel and being an apprentice of Jesus. Where do we go when we die? Well, that's an obvious one, isn't it? How many fingers am I holding up? That was a tougher one. So we said, if you have ever asked that kind of question, well, okay, maybe not that last one, you will be interested in Good God at the Bad Dog, a series of free-flowing discussions about the God questions over coffee and snacks at your favorite coffee shop, The Bad Dog at 229 Lock Street. And in fact, the snacks were provided free of charge by the owner, who was so delighted that we wanted to do this that she just wouldn't let us pay for them. Over the 4 weeks, we had about 12 people come. 6 were church members, 6 were not. I tried to start it again that fall. First one was May, second series was going to be November. In November, nobody came. So that was a total failure. I really shouldn't have wasted my time on that writing. No, it was a good thing to do. I said to my pastor, I don't think it's going to grow into a fresh expression of church. He said, you don't know that. Maybe a couple of years down the road we'll have church at the Bad Dog. Oh, yes, you're right. Or it might have been something that fed people back into the existing church. But even as a thing by itself that lasted 4 weeks and then it was gone, I think it was still a worthwhile thing to do. A young priest in Port Colborne who once a month does church on tap in his local pub. And a community has gathered around him who are asking spiritual questions, but wouldn't necessarily darken the doors of a regular church or a regular church service.
Across from Bridge 21 on the Welland Canal, in downtown Port Colborne is the Canalside Pub and Eatery, the home of Church on Tap.
The reason we decided to try this new ministry was because we thought there was an audience out there, a group of people that were not being reached through ordinary worship in the church, people who weren't comfortable coming to a church building with all of the traditions and rituals and things involved in that. And we thought, well, why not try it in a pub?
We came down to the Canalside Pub and Eatery and talked to Greg Poisson, who is the owner, along with his wife Rosemary, and we just explained to them our idea, and he thought it was fantastic. He has a really kind of good sense of what a pub is and how a pub is really this public meeting place for the exchange of ideas and for people to get together and chat and discuss and learn from each other. So he felt that kind of church and pub would fit quite well, and so he basically decided to give us the pub on the last Sunday of every month after 8 o'clock in the evening. To this place where we can gather, for friends that we can gather with, and to the God who actually gathers us together, we say peace and drink up.
We have found that we do have several people who are coming out who have never really been connected with any church of any kind, be it Anglican or any other type of religion. It's sort of a new expression of faith for themselves.
A community of faith in perhaps the most liberal sense, where we might reach out to those who wouldn't step foot in a traditional church. The changes we've kind of made would include you know, just incorporating secular music rather than kind of traditional kind of religious music, and making it very discussion-based. No one stands up and preaches a sermon or a homily. Rather, we usually watch a video and then we engage with that video, and we invite the participants and those who are attending to share their own thoughts on it. And sometimes in a bar, you get a real good banter going. You know, people don't have a problem kind of throwing out a point and then a counterpoint back and forth. is kind of our constant challenge to the congregation, is that, hey, if you don't feel comfortable bringing your friends on Sunday morning, then we're bending over backwards to kind of create a venue and an atmosphere that you should certainly feel comfortable bringing a friend to, perhaps. So, and they've responded.
Here is a program offered by a local Baptist church doing Alpha in a pub. Now, I don't know what your experience is, but in my world, Alpha and Baptists and pubs are not three things that you generally find in the same sentence. Even more outrageous, he charged them $100 to take the course. People paid good money to be evangelized. What is wrong with these people? For the $100, they got a beer and a burger every week. And they met, appropriately enough, in the upper room of this pub called the Yellow Griffin. Is that nice? Now, again, that might have turned into a self-supporting church. As it happens, a number of people became Christians, and their preference was to go back to the church that my friend was already pastoring. That's fine. But it was trying to reach people who are not reached any other way, not saying, come and do Alpha in the church basement. Who wants to go to a church basement? Certainly not me. I've spent far too much of my life in gloomy church basements already. Why not go to a place where people are comfortable and at home and do it there, and they might even pay you. Messy Church, you have heard about. Sue, who's at the back, is a national trainer for Messy Church and is finally actually leading a Messy Church herself in our congregation in Hamilton. And again, it's called Messy Church not because it's a way of getting people interested in Jesus and then getting them back into real church. It's called Messy Church because the hope is that some of these will actually turn into church in their own right. It's once a month. It's generally midweek. We do ours on a Thursday night, which is not uncommon. There's almost an hour of crafts as people arrive on a theme for the evening. Then there is a short 15 or 20-minute worship segment, again on the theme, with a Bible story and songs and a prayer, and then people have a meal. So you're done by 7 o'clock. It's 2 hours. It's for families. It is messy. My 5-year-old granddaughter said before the first one, "Is it really going to be messy?" Yes, dear, it is. It's not her experience of church. But even the name makes people smile and think, oh, maybe it will be okay. But some people hearing this or experiencing this think, well, does this actually make disciples? Does it make apprentices of Jesus Christ? Surely it's just a little light fun and giving kids a Bible story. So Judy Paulson, Anglican priest in Oshawa, did her Doctor of Ministry research on how does Messy Church affect people. And she discovered things like, when people get home from Messy Church, they discuss the Bible story they have heard. Families who have never prayed together are beginning to pray because of what they have learned at Messy Church. They're beginning to say grace. They're beginning to discuss, what does this stuff that we're learning mean in our daily lives? That sounds pretty good to me. I suspect there are people who've been in church all of their lives for whom those would be alien concepts. So it does actually work. Before we're done, I want to show you one more video, and I chose this one particularly because it is, again, it's from England. It's in a rural setting, so we can probably relate to it more easily than to this huge city of Liverpool. It's called Sunday 4-6. Again, these weird names. Why don't they just call it, St. Athanasius and get on with it? Anyway, you'll notice in this, the lady who tells the story is the deanery evangelist. Now, there's a concept unknown in England, in Canada, the deanery evangelist. But listen as she describes it, because she says, if I was starting again, I would do it a little differently. Doing this kind of thing doesn't always work. My good God at the bad dog didn't go where I hoped it would go. But we need permission to try these new things, even if they don't work out as we intend. So here's another story of someone saying, well, I tried it and it's going okay, but if I was doing it again, I would do it differently. And over time, we learn and things improve. So here is the story of Sunday 4-6 at the little village of Clawton. Did you notice what she said about if I were doing it again? She was more interested in people who had no connection with church. Well, this is valuable. This is for people who have been burned or disillusioned with church for one reason or another. So it is a safe place for them in a way that regular church seems not to be. Did you notice why she said she doesn't think it's yet a church? Doesn't have a sense of mission. Oh dear, is that one of the qualifications for being a church? Well, just to review these are the ones I've told you about. Somewhere else, the bread-making church, Good God at the Bad Dogs, discussions in the coffee shop, Church on Tap, meeting in a pub, God at the Pub, the Alpha in the upper room at the Yellow Griffin, Messy Church, Sunday 4-6. Again, none of these, I don't want anyone to say, oh, we're going to do that one. It needs to start with missional discernment. Where is God at work? What is God asking us to do here?